Russell Faria, who went by Russ, spent most Tuesday nights with his friends. They often played a role-playing game. On Tuesday, December 27, 2011, 42-year-old Russ left his home in Troy, Missouri around 5:30 to go to his friend's home. His friend lived in Lake St. Louis, Missouri, which is about 20 miles from his home. That night, they didn't have enough people to play the game, so they just watched movies. He left his friend's home around 9 p.m. On his way home, he stopped at an Arby's restaurant and got some food. Around 9:40 p.m., Russ returned home and found his 41-year-old wife, Elizabeth Faria, dead. His wife, commonly known as Betsy, had been stabbed 55 times. A serrated knife was still embedded in her neck. Her body was cold to the touch, meaning she had been dead for hours. Russ immediately called 911, telling the dispatcher that his wife may have killed herself. Betsy had been diagnosed with breast cancer earlier that year, and it was terminal. She had talked about suicide multiple times. When investigators arrived, they immediately knew that Betsy's death was too gruesome to have been a suicide. They knew they were investigating a homicide. As in most cases, the first suspect is the victim's romantic partner. In this case, that was Russ Faria. The police thought that Russ's 911 call was suspicious. She believed that Russ was going in and out of hysteria and he was just acting. But Russ had a solid alibi for the time of the murder. 4 of his friends said that they were with him around the time of the murder. On his way home, Russ bought sandwiches from Arby's and he had a receipt for the food. Plus, surveillance footage proved he was at the restaurant. No physical evidence tied Russ to the murder. There was no blood on his clothes. The clothes Russ was wearing when the police responded to the call were the same clothes he was wearing at Arby's. However, the police did find his slippers hidden in a closet and they were smeared in blood. The police spoke to Betsy's best friend, Pam Hupp. She and Betsy had been friends for 10 years, working in the insurance industry together. Hupp told the police that Russ was an aggressive drinker who verbally abused his sick wife. She told the police about a Word document on Betsy's computer where Betsy wrote she was worried about being murdered by Russ. According to Hupp, Betsy had a series of affairs and she was about to tell Russ about them. Hupp was the last person to see Betsy alive. She had insisted on driving Betsy home from her chemotherapy session that afternoon. But Betsy declined because she had a ride and she was going to her mother's home. Hupp was then adamant that she would pick Betsy up at her mother's home and drive her home. Betsy accepted that ride. Hupp said she dropped Betsy off around 7 p.m. Hupp said she stayed in the area and called her own husband a little after 7 p.m. She claimed that at 7:27 she called Betsy to tell her she made it home safely, but there was no answer. Russ Faria was charged with murder on the same day as his wife's funeral. He went to trial in November 2013. Russ's lawyer, Joel Schwartz, pointed out that there was little physical evidence connecting him to the murder. The only evidence was the slippers with blood that were hidden in the closet. Schwartz argued that the killer planted those to frame Russ. Plus, Russ had an alibi for the time of the murder. Russ had 4 friends who claimed he was with them from about 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. Pam Hupp said she dropped Betsy off at home around 7 p.m. So at that time, Russ was at his friend's home. Russ also had the receipt from Arby's and he was recorded on CCTV. The prosecutor, Lee Askey, argued that Russ's friends helped him cover up the murder. They all lied and said he was with them at the time of the murder. Askey said that after Russ murdered his wife, he went to Arby's to establish an alibi. She also argued that the 911 call was staged. The supervisor of the 911 dispatcher who took the call testified, and she thought that Russ was putting on an act. But oddly, the 911 dispatcher who took the call did not testify. A police officer testified that at the crime scene, they found a blood trail that led to the drawer with towels in it, and it appeared that someone had attempted to clean up the crime scene. He said that only someone with intimate knowledge of the house would have known the towels were there. Had it been someone unfamiliar with the house, they would have found blood in other places as they searched for a towel. The officer said there were no crime scene photos because the camera malfunctioned. Hupp testified in the trial. She claimed that Betsy and Russ's relationship was volatile and Russ was abusive. But besides Hupp's testimony, there was no other evidence that Russ was abusive. Hupp told the court that she was named beneficiary to Betsy's $150,000 insurance policy that was taken out 5 days before her murder. Hupp claimed that the $100,000 was to be put in a trust for Betsy's daughters. The other $50,000 was to go to a friend of her and Betsy's who also had cancer. Russ claimed he knew nothing about this policy, but he was the beneficiary of another $100,000 plan. Hupp said that Betsy planned on leaving Russ and she didn't trust her family to handle the money. In the prosecutor's closing argument, she claimed that Russ killed Betsy while naked, showered, and then put his clothes on. But none of this was backed up by evidence. There was no blood found in the shower drain. There was also no evidence that anyone had showered that night. Despite strong evidence supporting Russ's innocence, the jury convicted him of first-degree murder after 4 hours of deliberation. Russ Faria was sentenced to life in prison without the chance of parole. Russ's biggest problem with the trial was because of Missouri law, he couldn't present an alternative suspect because there was no physical evidence that connected an alternative suspect to the murder. His lawyer, Joel Schwartz, was sure that the real killer was Pamela Hupp. She had framed Russ for murder and got away with it. The police had never considered Hupp a suspect, just a credible witness. The conviction did not sit well with people. In March 2014, Fox 2 and the St. Louis Dispatch published a jointly written article of their findings on the Russ Faria case. The article strongly implicated that Pam Hupp was the killer and she had framed Russ. According to the story, Hupp never gave any of the money to Betsy's daughters. She had set up a trust shortly before the trial, but took all the money out of it days after the trial. As for the other $50,000 that was supposed to go to their cancer-ridden friend, she still had it. Hupp claimed that her friend died before she could give it to her. The article also pointed out that Hupp gave contradictory information to the police. At one point, Hupp said she never entered Betsy's home. But then she later told them that she went inside, and she went as far as the living room. The article also brings up things that were not revealed to the jury. According to cell phone records, when Pam Hupp called Betsy at 7:27 p.m., she was still in Betsy's neighborhood. But Hupp claimed she was at home when she made that call. She said she was calling Betsy to tell her that she had made it home safely. Why would she lie about that? Also, what was she doing in Betsy's neighborhood nearly half an hour after she supposedly dropped her off? Hupp was asked to take a polygraph, but her doctor wrote her a note saying that she had a head injury and was on medication, which meant her results may not be accurate. Turned out that Hupp had specifically asked her doctor for the note, so the police didn't give her a polygraph exam. Also, other friends of the couple disputed Hupp's claim that Betsy and Russ had a volatile relationship. They said that the marriage had its rough spots, but things had recently gotten better. The reporters also talked to the 911 dispatcher who took the call. She believed that Russ's emotions were genuine. She said it's common for people to swing between being calm and hysterical when dealing with something so traumatic. In April 2014, Betsy's daughters sued Pam Hupp for the life insurance money. At a deposition in July 2014, Hupp testified that the money was never supposed to go to the daughters. She said that the police and the district attorney had pressured her to say that because it would help with their case. If the money was going to her, it might make it look like she had a motive to kill Betsy. This would have allowed Russ's lawyer to present Hupp as an alternative suspect. In October 2014, Joel Schwartz filed a motion arguing that Russ should receive a new trial for two reasons. The first was that if Hupp always intended to keep the money, This was evidence of a motive, making her a viable alternative suspect. Secondly, there was evidence that at the time of the murder, the prosecutor, Liaski, was having an affair with one of the investigators on the case, Michael Lang. Lang testified at the trial. Russ's lawyer received a printout of an email exchange between the two. In the email, Lang wrote, "I will do my best to be everything you need." Lang was the detective who made the decision not to request data that would have mapped Russ's cell phone location on the night of the murder. This would have backed up Russ's alibi. In February 2015, an appeals court made the rare move of ordering a judge to revisit several issues in the case. Then in June 2015, Russ's conviction was overturned and he was ordered to stand trial again. Russ Freya went to trial again in November 2015. This time he elected to be tried by judge and not jury. Pam Hupp did not testify at the second trial. Joel Schwartz was Russ's lawyer again. This time he argued that the real killer was Pam Hupp. By her own admission, Hupp was the last person to see Betsy alive. She had also lied to the police about her whereabouts at the time of the murder. She was near Betsy's house at the time of the murder. She also had a motive, the money from the life insurance policy. A detective also testified that Hupp told him she and Betsy had been lovers. She said that Betsy was going to tell Russ about the affair on the night she was killed. This was an entirely new story from Hupp. She initially told the police that Betsy was having a series of affairs. And this was just one example where Hupp had lied. The officer who testified in the first trial about the blood trail leading to the drawer with the towels, that the crime scene had been cleaned up, and that there was no crime scene photos, testified again. He gave similar testimony. Schwartz then surprised the detective by handing him 132 crime scene photos. It turns out that the photos had been developed, but they did not show a blood trail to the drawer with the towels, or that the crime scene had been cleaned up. Since the photos didn't back up the theory, the police had lied and said there were no photos. Someone in the prosecutor's office had secretly sent Schwartz the photos. So that police officer had perjured himself on the stand twice. The supervisor of the 911 operator testified again. She claimed that based on her experience of listening to 911 calls, Russ was acting. The judge stopped her from testifying. The trial lasted a week. Russ Freya was acquitted of Betsy's murder. He had spent 3 years in prison for a murder he had not committed. In February 2016, Betsy's daughters lost the civil case against Pam Hupp. The judge ruled that if Betsy wanted her daughters to have the money, she would have made them the insurance policy beneficiaries. In July 2016, Russ brought a civil suit against 3 police officers, claiming they fabricated evidence against him and failed to investigate the other obvious suspect. After Russ was acquitted, investigators reopened the case, and this time, the prime suspect was Pam Hupp. Then, something disturbing happened in August 2016, more than a year after the second trial. On August 16th, Pam Hupp called the police to her home. She had shot a man to death. He was identified as 33-year-old Louis Gumpenberger, a man with physical and mental impairments from a 2005 car accident. She claimed that Gumpenberger was a stranger to her. She said she returned home and Gumpenberger got out of his vehicle. He then got into the passenger seat and threatened her with a knife. He demanded she take him to the bank because he was ordered to get Russ's money. She claimed she was able to knock the knife out of his hand. She then escaped into the house, but Gumpenberger followed her inside. She said she managed to get into the bedroom where she had a gun. She then shot Gumpenberger to death. In Gumpenberger's pockets were $900 and a note with instructions to kidnap Hupp and get Russ's money. The police were immediately suspicious. They believed that Hupp was once again trying to frame Russ and distract investigators. It turned out that 6 days before the deadly shooting, a woman contacted the police about a strange incident. She said that a woman driving an SUV introduced herself as a producer from the true crime show, Dateline. The woman in the SUV wanted her to record a reenactment of a 911 call. She had offered her $1,000. The woman initially agreed to do it, but then backed out when the woman claiming to be the producer couldn't provide credentials to prove that she was from the show. The woman had video from a security camera at her house and it recorded the woman's SUV. The police ran the license plate. The SUV belonged to Pam Hupp. Also, Hupp claimed she didn't know Gumpenberger, but cell phone records showed that she had been in this neighborhood about an hour before the shooting. In Gumpenberger's pockets were 9 $100 bills. Another $100 bill was found on Hupp's dresser. Its serial numbers were sequential to 4 of the bills in Gumpenberger's pocket. Also, the police were suspicious about the 911 call. That day, Pam had called 911 twice before she called to report shooting Gumpenberger. Both times she hung up without saying anything. When she did call to report the shooting, there were 2 to 3 seconds of dead air. The police thought that this was unusual. In similar circumstances, the caller usually starts talking right away. But another odd thing was that Gumpenberger's body was on a carpet swath. The police thought that Hupp had him stand there and shot him so that her carpet wouldn't get dirty with blood. Hupp claimed that Gumpenberger threatened her with a knife. The police tracked down where the knife was purchased. It was from a dollar store. The police got a record of the transaction. Also purchased in the transaction was the notepad, which the note was written on, and some air fresheners. The same kind of air fresheners were found in Hupp's house. Hupp claimed she knocked the knife out of Gumpenberger's hand, but it was found in an odd spot in her SUV. It was wedged between the center console and the passenger seat. Hupp stored her knives in a similar way in her kitchen between the counter and the stove. Another problem was Gumpenberger's cognitive and physical abilities. Notably, he couldn't drive, so how did he get to Hupp's home? The police theorized that Hupp encountered Gumpenberger randomly. She offered him a chance to record a line for Dateline. She went to his home, picked him up, and brought her back to her house. She made him stand on the carpet swath and then shot him to death. Less than a week after the shooting of Gumpenberger, on August 23, 2016, Hupp was charged with murder. After she was arrested, she stabbed herself several times with a ballpoint pen that she had snuck into her cell. She was taken to the hospital and survived her wounds. After her arrest made the news, a man contacted the police. He said that Hupp had also approached him, pretending to be someone from Dateline. About a month later, the police opened a third murder investigation into Pamela Hupp. Nearly 2 years after Betsy was killed, in October 2013, Hupp's 77-year-old mother, Shirley Newman, was living in a retirement home. She had Alzheimer's disease. Near the end of the month, she had been hospitalized. On October 30th, 2013, Hupp picked her mother up at the hospital and brought her to the retirement home. As Hupp was leaving, she told the staff to notify the family if her mother didn't come down for breakfast. Newman didn't show up for breakfast or lunch. That afternoon, her dead body was found on the lawn below her third-story apartment. It appeared she had fallen. At the time, her death was labeled an accident, but there were some oddities. Toxicology reports showed that there was a high level of the sedative Ambien in her bloodstream. It was 8 times the level of the prescribed amount. Also, when someone falls off a balcony, they usually go over the railing, but it appeared that Newman went through the railing. 2 vertical bars had been knocked off and were on the lawn near her body. Another bar was broken in half, and part of it was still attached to the railing. Hupp, the last person to see her mother, inherited $500,000. Before Russ's second trial, the prosecutor, Lee Askey, interviewed Hupp. At some point, they talked about her mother, and she said, "People say I killed her. We had sold her house, her car, and everything she owned and put her in a home. To everybody else on this planet, I took a 210-pound woman and threw her through railings. How do you do that? How does a man do that? Both Dayline and Fox 2 asked engineers about the damage to the railing. They said it would have taken a lot of force for someone to do that. They said it was very unlikely that a 77-year-old woman with a bad back could have taken a running dive through it. Pam also said something odd to the police about her mother 4 months before she mysteriously died. Hupp said, "I really hate to say it. If I wanted money, my mom's worth $500,000 that I could get when she dies. My mom has dementia and doesn't half the time know who we are. She's been living alone in a condo, and I know that sounds really morbid and stuff like that, but I'm a life insurance person. If I really wanted money, there was an easier way than trying to combat somebody that's physically stronger than me. I'm just saying." In November 2017, the medical examiner changed the cause of death from accidental to undetermined. The prosecution announced in March 2017 they would be seeking the death penalty against Pamela Hupp in the murder of Louis Gumpenberger. Hupp's defense lawyer filed motions that argued that details about Betsy Ferreira's murder shouldn't be talked about at Hupp's trial. But in January 2019, the judge decided to allow the prosecution to bring up Betsy's murder. 6 months later, in June 2019, Hupp entered an Alford plea. With an Alford plea, the accused acknowledges that there's enough evidence to convict, yet they don't have to admit guilt. In exchange for the plea, the prosecution dropped the death sentence. Instead, Hupp was sentenced to life without the chance of parole. In March 2020, Russ Ferreira was awarded $2.2 million in his lawsuit against the county. In July 2021, Pamela Hupp was charged with Betsy Ferreira's murder. 2 years later, in October 2023, the district attorney refiled the charges to petition the trial to be in a county closer to Lincoln County. Hupp is expected to go to trial in the summer of 2025. As of early 2024, Pam Hupp has not been charged in connection with the murder of her mother, Shirley Newman. The story of Pam Hupp was the basis for the NBC miniseries The Thing About Pam, which was released in 2022. At the time of this recording, 65-year-old Pamela Hupp is serving her sentence at the Chillicothe Correctional Center in Chillicothe, Missouri. In 1981, Patrick and Jeanette Kelly, who lived in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, were both unhappy in their marriage, and they talked about divorce. 31-year-old Patrick worked for the Royal Mounted Canadian Police as an undercover drug officer. Patrick had been unfaithful to his wife. He had been seeing several women outside their marriage. In early 1981, he was having affairs with 3 women. He was also having financial problems. He was spending too much money trying to keep up his lavish lifestyle. On March 29, 1981, Patrick called the police, claiming that his 33-year-old wife, Jeanette, fell off the balcony of their 17th floor Toronto high-rise. He claimed his wife had complained about a rattling on the balcony. She took a stool out to investigate. Suddenly, as he stood in the kitchen, he heard her scream. He raced from the kitchen to the balcony and saw Jeanette falling over the railing. He said he managed to get to the balcony in time to grab the upper part of her legs, but he couldn't hold on. She then fell to her death. Patrick claimed that his wife's death was an accident. The Toronto police had their suspicions that Jeanette's death was no accident from the beginning. An autopsy was performed on Jeanette's body the day after her death. The medical examiner noticed some abnormalities. They noted that Jeanette landed in a seated position and she had injuries to the base of her spine and the back of her legs. There were no major external injuries above the waist. The examiner also found an abrasion over her left breast consistent with a blow of some kind. The examiner noted that there were scrapes on her nose and injuries on her lips and jaw. These injuries are commonly seen with punches to the face. But the police didn't feel like they had enough evidence to charge Patrick with murder. In the aftermath of Jeanette's death, Patrick collected about $270,000 from Jeanette's life insurance policy. He had taken the policy out without her knowledge. Patrick quickly moved on with his life. Shortly after the funeral, he vacationed in Hawaii with one of the women he had been seeing behind Jeanette's back. And it wasn't long before Patrick married again. He married Jan Bradley, a librarian who he had been involved with since he was married. In the winter of 1981, Patrick and Jan moved to southern France. The couple lived a lavish lifestyle. They would occasionally take weekend trips to the Bahamas. Patrick bought suits by the dozens. Meanwhile, in Toronto, the police continued collecting evidence against Patrick Kelly. They conducted an experiment by setting up a recreation of the Kellys' apartment. One officer, acting as Jeanette, stood on a stool near a railing, while another officer, serving as Patrick, was positioned in the kitchen. The officer standing in for Patrick was a former 100-yard dasher who was wearing running shoes. Despite their attempts, the officer never got close to reaching the balcony in time to rescue the other officer. They concluded it was impossible for Patrick to run from the kitchen to the balcony in time to reach Jeanette. An expert in velocity from Toronto's Forensic Science Center also disproved Patrick's claim, saying he would not have been able to make it to the balcony before Jeanette hit the ground. The expert also claimed that Jeanette would not have landed on her spine from an accidental fall. The police arrested Patrick when he returned to Canada in March 1983. As the prosecutors built their case against Patrick, a witness came forward that added a twist to the story. Dawn Tabor was a friend of the Kellys in the early 80s. However, she was secretly romantically involved with Patrick. She claimed she was in the apartment when Patrick tossed Jeanette from the balcony. On the day Jeanette was killed, Tabor entered the apartment building through a back entrance with keys given to her by Jeanette. The Kellys let Tabor into the apartment. She sat in the den while they argued in another room. Tabor claimed she heard Jeanette refuse to give Patrick a divorce. She then heard Jeanette scream. She raced into the room and saw Jeanette lying on the floor. Then she saw Patrick pick up his unconscious wife and toss her over the balcony. Tabor collapsed after the incident. Patrick consoled her, told her he loved her, and to go home. Tabor said it took her 2 years to come forward with this information because she was afraid of Patrick, who worked in law enforcement. However, investigators told Tabor nothing would happen to her if she testified. Patrick Kelly went to trial in April 1984. Dawn Tabor told the court that Patrick would take care of Jeanette so that they could be together. Tabor said that Patrick loved her and wanted to take her to France. She also said that Patrick claimed it was impossible to tell how someone fell from a balcony. The prosecution also alleged that Patrick was involved in money laundering for organized crime. Tabor's testimony and the forensic evidence were enough to convict Patrick Kelly. A jury believed he killed his wife for the insurance payout. Patrick was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for 25 years. Over the next few years, his attorneys appealed the conviction without luck. Patrick maintained that Jeanette's death was an accident. Even the star witness, Dawn Tabor, changed her story over the years. She fully recanted the story in 1995. Tabor said she, quote, created a false memory from her dreams as a result of police pressure and an unstable emotional state, unquote. She claimed her testimony came from being coerced into giving a statement under hypnosis. She sent a letter to Canada's Justice Minister asking for an immediate audience to discuss the case. Patrick hoped that this would help his bid for a retrial in 1999. However, an Ontario appeals court felt her claim wasn't believable. While in prison, Patrick earned 2 university degrees and a certificate. He also built and donated wood furniture for charity. Patrick's efforts to earn early parole proved little had changed with him. He was denied parole in 2001 when a psychiatric evaluation said he was a cunning, lying manipulator, but he did earn early parole in 2003. However, it was revoked 2 years later when the parole board heard he had defrauded a female business partner of $40,000 and cheated on his common-law wife. He was then awarded day parole in 2008, which had to be renewed every 6 months until he was given full release in 2010. Patrick settled in Prince George, British Columbia, where he spent the latter part of his sentence. In 2012, Patrick was sent back to prison. The parole board claimed Patrick was repeating deceitful behavior. Between May and August 2012, Patrick had been having affairs with 3 women. One of the women came forward after they became aware of his past. The board sent him back to prison because he did not disclose the relationships. He had also developed a drinking problem and lied to customers about his work in his restoration business. These were all violations of his parole. In 2013, he lost his appeal and he was ordered to stay in prison. He was again granted day parole with overnight privileges in 2014. In 2016, the parole board permitted him to move to Vancouver Island. Since then, Patrick Kelly has stayed out of the news. He is about 73 years old at the time of this recording. In the German legal system, people are only identified by their first names and the initials or the last names, so we will be doing that for this video. In August 2022, 23-year-old Shahraban K, who went by Sherry, was living with her parents in Munich, Germany. Sherry worked as a beautician. She had been married for 4 years, but recently moved out of the apartment she shared with her husband. She and her husband had ran a beauty salon. She and her husband had been fighting frequently in the months leading to the split up. Sherry had also been fighting with her husband's family. On August 16, 2022, Sherry told her parents that she was going to her former apartment, which she shared with her estranged husband, in Ingolstadt, a city about 50 miles north of Munich, to pick up her mail. When Sherry didn't return home, her parents went looking for her. In a residential area in Ingolstadt, they found her black Mercedes-Benz parked on the street. They saw the body of their daughter in the back seat under a blanket. It looked like she was dead. The car was locked, so they tried to break a window, but they couldn't. The police were called, and they got the door open. Sherry was dead. She had been stabbed dozens of times in the upper body, and her face was disfigured. The police instantly had a suspect, her estranged husband. They interviewed him immediately. He claimed he had nothing to do with the murder. He said that his estranged wife was violent and she had hit him several times. One time she smashed his head into a mirror. Another time she tried to run him down with her car. She had threatened him several times. He had even gotten a restraining order against her. An autopsy was conducted. The victim had been hit several times in the head with brass knuckles. She had been stabbed 56 times in the face, neck, chest, and back. There were no signs of sexual assault. The medical examiner noted something unusual. The body had several tattoos, but Sherry didn't have any tattoos. The tattoos did match a missing woman, identified only as Khadija O. Khadija had been last seen a few hours before the body was found. Khadija was a 23-year-old beauty blogger who looked remarkably like Sherry. Khadija lived in Heilbronn, which is about 130 miles from where the body was found. DNA testing confirmed it was Khadija's body and not Sherry's. About 22 hours after the body was found, Sherry went to a pizzeria in Ingolstadt and asked to use a phone. She told the owner that her SIM card was broken. The owner noticed that she looked distressed. The owner gave her his phone and she made 2 calls. At least one was to the police. Then she sat down in front of the pizzeria and waited for the police to arrest her. The police took her into custody a short time later. Later that night, Sherry's friend, 25-year-old Shahraban K, who went by the name Cece, was arrested at the apartment he shared with his mother. The apartment was a few hundred yards from where the body was found. Over the next year, the police investigated the pair, and they pieced together what they believed happened. Sherry was not happy in her marriage. She also loathed her husband's brother. She told people her brother-in-law made their lives miserable. He also apparently forced her to have an abortion. In January 2022, she met a man named Vulcan A. Vulcan told her if she paid him, he could kill her brother-in-law. In July 2022, Sherry told Vulcan that she would pay him 10,000 euros for the hit. She paid him 5,000 euros up front. But Vulcan never followed through with the job. He later said he never intended to kill the brother-in-law and just wanted to rip off Sherry. Sherry wanted to leave her husband and start a new relationship with a man that her family did not approve of. After being swindled out of the money, Sherry took steps to fake her death and frame her husband for the murder. She met Cece on Instagram a few days before the murder. Cece's mother said he was easy to manipulate. Also, Cece's friends and family said that he had become infatuated with Sherry. Sherry searched Instagram looking for a doppelganger so that she could kill her and make it look like she had died. She found 26 women who looked like her and reached out to at least 5. On August 9, 2022, about a week before the murder, the victim, Khadija, received a message from Instagram from a woman claiming to be associated with the German rapper Loon. The woman offered Khadija a role in Loon's next music video. Khadija contacted Loon via Instagram and asked her if the offer was real. Loon replied and told her it was a scam. 2 days later, Khadija received a message on Instagram from a different account. It was a woman who said she ran a cosmetic studio in Ingolstadt. She offered Khadija a free treatment during a photo shoot. The woman was then going to use the photos for advertisement. The woman offered to pick up Khadija at home and drive her to the studio. She gave Khadija the studio's address, which was the hair salon of Sherry's estranged husband. Khadija accepted the offer. The police tracked Sherry and Cece's phones throughout the night of the murder. After picking up Khadija, they started driving towards Ingolstadt. They stopped near a wooded area in Massenbachhausen. It's believed that they tricked Khadija to get out of the car. They think she was asked to read a road sign. Once she was out of the car, Cece punched her in the head repeatedly with the brass knuckles. He then stabbed her to death. When she was dead and disfigured, they loaded her body back into the car. Then they drove to Ingolstadt, where they abandoned the car. Sherry and Cece went to trial in January 2024. Sherry testified, and she admitted she tried to hire Vulcan to kill her brother-in-law. But she said she did not orchestrate the murder of Khadija. She claimed that Cece forced her to drive him to pick up Khadija. Then, as they were driving home, he got out to urinate. Khadija also got out to smoke. Then, Cece attacked her. Sherry said that after they returned to Ingolstadt, he threatened to kill her if she told anyone. The prosecution argued that Cece had no reason to murder a stranger who lived over 100 miles away. But Sherry wanted to escape her life. She wanted to leave her husband and be with a man her family didn't approve of. She thought if she killed her doppelganger and her family and the police believed it was her, it would have given her a chance at a new life. It's believed that Sherry had been planning to do something nefarious for years. On her phone that she used in 2016 and 2017, there were searches on how to buy a gun and how to go into hiding. Unfortunately, the trial's outcome could not be found, and Sherry and Cece's current status is unknown. In the media, the murder has been called the Instagram lookalike murder and the doppelganger murder. In July 2010, Iwona Wieczorek was 19 years old. She lived with her mother and stepfather in Gdansk, which is a city on the Baltic coast of Poland. On the night of July 16, 2010, Iwona went out with her best friend, Adria, and 3 male acquaintances, Pavel, Marek, and Adrian. They started off the night by having some drinks at Pavel's grandfather's home in Sopot, which is a city that neighbors Gdansk. Then they went out to a nightclub in Sopot. Iwona and Pavel were on a pseudo date, but during the night they found that they weren't really attracted to each other. Adria said that Iwona wasn't over her former boyfriend, a young man named Patrick. They had broken up months earlier. Just after 1 a.m., Iwona got a text message from a friend. The text message said that Patrick was partying with some girls at a different club. This soured Iwona's mood. Later on that night, Iwona and Pavel got into a fight. At about 2:50 a.m., Iwona stormed out of the club alone. It's unclear where she went after she left the club. One possibility is that she went to the club where Patrick was hanging out. If she did go, she was not recorded on the club's CCTV cameras. Nevertheless, at some point shortly after leaving the club, she started to walk on the promenade along the Baltic Sea towards her home. Her home was nearly 4 miles from the club. According to Google Maps, it should have taken her about an hour and 15 minutes to walk home if she stayed on the promenade. Between 3 and 4 o'clock, she called 5 friends. This included Adria and Pavel. She made her last call just after 4 a.m. to Adria. Iwona did not want to go home to her apartment because she was drunk and her mother and stepfather were home. Adria lived in the same apartment building and her parents were away, so Iwona was going to stay with her. A couple minutes after the phone call, Adria, who lived on the ground floor of the apartment, sent Iwona a text message to say that she had left the keys on the balcony. Adria saw that Iwona did not read the text message. She knew that Iwona's phone was dying, so she didn't think anything of it. Iwona was recorded on camera walking on the seaside promenade about 1.5 miles from her home at 4:12 a.m. It's clear from the video that her high heel shoes were hurting her feet because she was carrying them and she was walking barefoot. A man is seen walking behind her. He is wearing plaid and he is carrying a towel. This footage is the last confirmed sighting of 19-year-old Iwona Wieczorek. She never made it home and she has never been seen again. There are several theories as to what happened to Iwona. One is that she had an accident and died. Since she was intoxicated and walking along the promenade, she may have fallen into the sea and drowned, and her body just hasn't been found. Another possibility is that Iwona was a victim of foul play. There are several theories about who could have been responsible for Iwona's disappearance. One theory is that the man who is following her and carrying the towel is the person responsible. He has never been identified. Some people think it's suspicious that he's never come forward and talked to the police. They think it's doubtful he wouldn't know about the case because it's one of the most famous disappearances in modern Polish history. However, the police do not believe he had anything to do with her disappearance. But since he was one of the last persons to see Iwona, the police would like to talk to him because he may know something. Another theory is that Iwona's former boyfriend, Patrick, was responsible for her disappearance. Patrick was questioned by the police, and he was asked where he was when Iwona went missing. He didn't say he went to a club that night. Instead, he said he was hanging out with friends on the boardwalk in Gdansk, and he was home by 1 a.m. But the police were able to prove that he was not telling the truth. Several witnesses saw him at the club that night. Also, he used his cell phone several times between 3 and 4 a.m., and he was not at home when he used his phone. When Patrick was confronted about these inconsistencies, he said that he didn't remember what he was doing when Iwona went missing. He said he could have been driving around with his friends when she went missing. Patrick was asked what he did later on the day that Iwona went missing. He said that he went to a seaside village that is 45 miles north of Gdansk. He was asked who he went with. He told the police he couldn't remember. The police interviewed Patrick's friends, and all their answers were inconsistent. According to one journalist who talked to a police officer, Patrick's friends supposedly attacked Iwona a week before she went missing. Iwona's mother does not believe this, and Patrick's friends have denied it. So while Patrick was inconsistent in his statements to the police, there is no physical evidence that he was involved in Iwona's disappearance. He remains a person of interest, but he has not been charged with any crimes. Then in the fall of 2017, a private detective agency went public with their theory about what happened to Iwona. They developed their theory by watching CCTV footage from cameras along the promenade. They noticed that a cleaning company was using a garbage truck to pick up trash from cans along the promenade where Iwona was walking. They theorized that the 3 workers on the truck harassed Iwona. Something happened, and the workers either intentionally or accidentally killed Iwona. Then they put her body in the back of the truck. At some point, they strayed from their route and drove to some storm sewers where they dumped her body. The detective agency said that they have one major piece of evidence that proves their theory, and that is CCTV footage. They said that if you look closely at this still of the footage, you can see Iwona's body in the back of the truck. The 3 workers were interviewed by the police. The detective agency read their statements and pointed out that there were inconsistencies. After the detective agency went public with their theory, the cleaning company employees adamantly denied being involved in Iwona's disappearance. They said that they saw her several times along their route that morning, but they did not interact with her. There are many people who have a problem with the detective agency's theory. They point out that the 3 workers had stayed on schedule and they had returned to their base on time. So would they have had enough time to kill Iwona, drive off their route, dump her body, and get back to the base on time? Another problem is how did they drive around with a body in the back of the truck with no one on the road noticing? Finally, the biggest problem is that many people who watch the footage and look at still frames of the footage do not see Iwona's body in the back of the truck. They think it's just garbage in the back of the truck. After they went public with their theory, the detective agency sent their evidence to the prosecutor. But the prosecutor said that they did not prove that the cleaning company employees had any connection with Iwona's disappearance. So no charges were filed against the employees. Iwona's mother believes that her daughter is dead. She hopes that whoever is responsible for her disappearance or has knowledge of it will come forward and reveal the location of her body. Around 1 a.m. on June 30th, 2007, 74-year-old Tavaglia called the police. She and her 35-year-old daughter, Angelique, who went by Angel, lived in Norfolk, Virginia. Fonda told the 911 operator that she was dying. First responders rushed to the mother and daughter's home. When they got there, Angel was dead in the bedroom. She had been stabbed around 38 times. Fonda had also been stabbed and was badly injured. In court, a defendant has the right to confront their accuser. An exception to that rule is called a dying declaration. It's a statement given by someone on their deathbed. For it to be legitimate, the person must believe they are dying, and then they have to die. The detective knew Fonda probably would not survive, and he told her that. He then asked who attacked them. Fonda said the name, Walter Lucas. She was then rushed to the hospital. Sadly, the 74-year-old mother and grandmother died a day later. The first person on the suspect list was Walter Lucas, who was Fonda's former son-in-law. He had been married to Angel's sister. The police thought it was logical that someone close to the mother and daughter killed them. There were no signs of a break-in or forced entry, but Lucas had an alibi. He was over 200 miles away at the time of the murder. There's also a reasonable explanation as to why Fonda named Lucas as her killer. Fonda had Alzheimer's disease, and she may have been confused. The next suspect was Angel's fiancé, David Wayne Hoshaw. Hoshaw lived with Fonda and Angel. The wedding had been about 2 months away. Hoshaw also had an alibi. He was at a Boy Scout week-long camp out with his son from his first marriage. The camp was out of town, so he was 80 miles away when the murders were committed. The police then cleared other persons of interest. The police were stumped as to who killed the mother and daughter and why. Then, just over 3 weeks after the murder, the police got a bizarre letter that was postmarked Chicago, Illinois. It's a type letter that reads, "You don't have a fucking clue, do you? Let me fill you in. I met the pretty biatch on the beach a few days before I killed her. What an easy target. She was checking all the guys out and seemed lonely, except she had her mother with her, so I casually went up to her and started a conversation. She told me she was getting married in September, but she wanted to have one last fling beforehand. I asked her why, and she told me she wanted to know if it was right between her and him, so I agreed. She told me I resembled her future hubby. We saw each other late at night after her mom went to bed. One night, it wasn't until 10:30, we kissed a little, and I got to second base on the first night. That Friday night, however, was a different story. She was wearing her sweatpants and a t-shirt when I got there. I finally coerced them off of her, and we started making out. When it came to going all the way, she told me she was having second thoughts and couldn't do it. We talked about it, but I couldn't convince her otherwise, so I agreed to lay there next to her as she went to sleep. After she was asleep, about 12:30 or so, I got my knife and did the dirty deed. What a rush. I should have gagged her first because she screamed and woke up her mother. If only she had put out that night, she could still be alive, and the old lady too. If she hadn't woken up and called 911, she would still be alive. I skipped town pretty quick. I move around a lot, so good luck catching me. Maybe I'll check in with you from time to time. Don't bother checking for prints or DNA. I am wearing a bodysuit and gloves. I wore gloves that night as well, so no bloody prints. Toodle." Then, about 3 weeks after that first letter, the police received a second letter from the killer. This one was mailed from Gaylord, Michigan. The second letter was poorly spelled. I will narrate it as if it was spelled correctly. "Detectives, I write to yous again. I must confess I have done it for a second time. Feels great to have the power. Freedom Street was just the beginning for me. It gave me such a rush, I can't explain. But the cops up here in my hometown are a lot smarter than yous down there. I had to leave the Windy City behind and cross the line. Well, haven't crossed yet, that's for tomorrow. Headed up to the cold, and then probably abroad to the family barely know in the cold country. Just wanted to say farewell and good riddance to you. I never forgot me first, the Goyanas. The police thought he may have killed someone else, possibly in the Midwest. So the police looked at murders that could have been committed by the same person, but they did not find anything of interest. Still, the letters were very disturbing to the police because even if he had not killed again, he seemed to enjoy murdering the Goyanas. The police checked both letters for forensic evidence and did not find any. The police continued to focus on Angel's diary. They noticed in the weeks before her murder, she thought that her fiancé, David Hoshaw, was acting distant. So the police decided to give him another look. Hoshaw had access to the house, and if people saw him at the crime scene around the time of the murders, they would not have thought much about it because he lived there. However, he had an alibi. He was 80 miles away at a week-long Boy Scout camp with his 12-year-old son. Other parents saw him at 11 p.m. and he was at breakfast at 6:30 a.m. However, the police noted that he didn't have an alibi at the time of the murder, which was around 1 a.m. He could have easily driven the 80 miles to the crime scene, committed the murders, and drove back without anyone noticing. So the police gave him a closer look. In the weeks before the murders, Hoshaw wasn't home often. He was an electrical engineer and worked for a Virginia-based company with Navy contracts. David told Angel that he was helping build a warship in the Midwest. But this was odd to the police. Why would the Navy build a warship in the Midwest, where the closest bodies of water were the Great Lakes, when Virginia is on the Atlantic coast? The police checked Hoshaw's computer at the crime scene. They learned that a week before the murder, Hoshaw changed the password to "for Amanda." The police thought that this was weird and made them wonder who Amanda was. It turned out that Hoshaw had been on dating websites and started dating another woman in Michigan named Amanda. When he told Angel he was away for work, he was actually with Amanda. The police talked to Hoshaw's 3 ex-wives plus 3 other women he had dated. During his first marriage, when he was in his 20s, he groomed and inappropriately touched a 12-year-old girl who was a family friend. He was in the Air Force at the time. The girl and her parents told Air Force officials. They chose to discharge Hoshaw instead of pressing criminal charges. Hoshaw's first wife said he was abusive. She ended up divorcing him. Other partners of Hoshaw accused him of lying, being abusive, and cheating. Another red flag for the police was Hoshaw's behavior after the murders. When he came to the police station to talk to homicide detectives, he didn't ask what they wanted to speak to him about. Another major red flag was that he didn't attend his fiancée's funeral. Shortly after the murders, Hoshaw moved to Michigan to live with his new girlfriend, Amanda. So while the police thought that all this was suspicious, there was no physical evidence that connected David Hoshaw to the murders. So the police tried to see if they could connect the letters to Hoshaw. They got a copy of his cell phone records. They determined on the same day the first letter was mailed from Chicago, he made a phone call a few miles from the post office that processed the letter. Around the second time the letter was mailed, David and his new girlfriend were on a road trip through Michigan. One highway runs through Gaylord, where the second letter was mailed from. According to David's credit card bills, he made purchases on the highway north of Gaylord before the letter was sent, and then made purchases south of Gaylord after it was sent. So the police felt that they could connect him to both letters. What are the odds that one person connected to the Goyanas was in the same areas on the same days that the letters were mailed? 2 years after the murders, in June 2009, 37-year-old David Hoshaw was arrested for the murders. He denied mailing the letters and committing the murders. He refused to talk to detectives and asked for a lawyer. Before his lawyer arrived, the police let him talk to his partner, Amanda, alone in the interview room. The room was equipped with a camera and microphone. Amanda asked Hoshaw if he did it, and he said he got stupid and crazy. He claimed he went to the house that night to break up with Angel, but things got out of hand. Amanda did not believe him. Why would he sneak away from a Boy Scout camp to break up with the woman he lived with? He also admitted that he sent the letters. He said that the letters were supposed to throw the police off his track. Ironically, if the police had never received the letters, they probably would have never had a reason to arrest him. David Hoshaw was looking at the death penalty if he was convicted, but a week before his trial in October 2010, he pleaded guilty to 2 counts of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life without parole. David Hoshaw is currently serving his sentence at the Riverdale Correctional Center in Independence, Virginia. In March 1927, the Snyder family lived in Queens Village, New York City. 44-year-old Albert Snyder and his wife, 31-year-old Ruth, had been married for almost 12 years. They had a 9-year-old daughter, Lorraine. Albert was the art editor at a popular magazine, Motorboating, and he made a good living. Ruth was a homemaker. When the couple met in 1915, Ruth was an overnight telephone operator. Most people who knew the couple thought that they were an odd pair. Albert was a homebody who was quiet and reserved. He liked to read and have intellectual conversations. Ruth liked going out and being social and thought reading was boring. Around 7:40 a.m. on March 20th, 1927, 9-year-old Lorraine called a neighbor saying they needed help. The police arrived and it appeared that the Snyder's home had been ransacked. Ruth's ankles were bound. In the bedroom was the dead body of 44-year-old Albert Snyder. He had been beaten in the head with a 5-pound window sash weight. Picture wire was wrapped around his neck. A piece of cloth doused in chloroform had been jammed up his nose. The police talked to Ruth. She said the night before they went to a bridge party. They got home around 2 a.m. Albert had a lot to drink and he went to bed and fell asleep almost immediately. Ruth said she was lying in bed and heard something. Ruth thought it was her daughter and she was worried that Lorraine might have been sick because of something she ate at the party. She said she went to check on Lorraine and saw a large man in the hallway. The man grabbed her and called for his partner. She described the men as large and said they looked Italian. She said in the bedroom she was struck on the head and lost consciousness. She woke up about 5 hours later and discovered she was gagged and her hands and ankles were bound. She managed to free her wrists and get the gag out. She woke up her daughter, who called the neighbor for help. Ruth told the police her jewelry and about $200 had been stolen. Nearly immediately, the police suspected that something was amiss. Notably, Ruth didn't have any head wounds, let alone one that would have knocked her out for 5 hours. When they arrived, only her ankles were bound. Why hadn't she freed her ankles after her wrists? Also, she didn't seem to care that her husband was dead. The crime scene was also odd. It was supposedly a burglary gone wrong. But to the police, the scene was not a typical home burglary. For example, the kitchen was torn apart. In the police's experience, burglars would get in and out as quickly as possible unless they were looking for something specific. The Snyders were a modest family, and they had nothing that was worth breaking into their home and attacking the homeowners. Also, the killers didn't take Albert's gold watch that was attached to a platinum chain. Every room had been trashed except for Lorraine's bedroom. Why would they leave the little girl's bedroom untouched if they were searching for something? Also, what kind of robber brings chloroform and picture wire to a crime scene? Finally, the house was warm, as if the furnace had been burning for hours. The police searched the home. Under Ruth's mattress was the jewelry she claimed was stolen. They also learned that Albert had a lot of life insurance. There were policies for $1,000 and another for $5,000. But what really caught their attention was a life insurance policy for $45,000. It had a double indemnity clause, which would pay out double if Albert died an accidental death, which included murder. In total, including the double indemnity, Albert's life was insured for $96,000, which, accounting for inflation, is more than $1.7 million in 2024. The police also found canceled checks made out to H. Judd Gray. They also found a pin with the initials JG on the floor of the main bedroom. In Ruth's address book, they found the phone number for Henry Judd Gray. The police wondered if Gray was somehow involved in the murder. Ruth was questioned at the police station, and the police told her that her story didn't make much sense. They didn't think she had worked alone and asked if Judd Gray was involved. Ruth said that Gray was the mastermind of the murder. Ruth explained that 2 years earlier they had met while Ruth was out for lunch with a friend. At the time, she and Albert were having problems in their marriage. She said that Albert had never gotten over his former fiancée. She had died of pneumonia weeks before they were going to get married. Albert hung a picture of her in their home, and he named his boat after his lost love. Ruth said that while she was at lunch with her friend introduced her to Gray, who worked as a corset salesman. Gray was also in an unhappy marriage, and he had a daughter. Ruth said that they soon started a sexual relationship. She said the murder plot was Gray's idea. He had arranged to take out the life insurance policies. He had purchased the window sash, the chloroform, and the picture wire. Ruth admitted that before they went to the party, she left the kitchen door unlocked, and while they were at the party, Gray entered the house and hid in a spare bedroom. Then Gray was the one who committed the murder. She watched as he struck Albert in the head with the weight. He then bound him and stuffed chloroform cloths up his nose. Gray's shirt was stained with blood, so she got him a new shirt, and they burned the bloody one in the furnace. This is why the house was so warm. They also hid the weight. Then Gray decided to strangle Albert with a picture wire to ensure he was dead. After that, they staged the house to look like a robbery, and Gray tied up Ruth. Then Gray left. She told the police that Gray could be found in a hotel room in Syracuse, New York. The police went to the hotel and found Gray there. He denied having anything to do with the murder. He claimed he was in the hotel room the entire time. The police looked in the hotel room, and in the waste bin, they found a train ticket from Syracuse to New York on the day of the murder. Judd Gray was arrested, and he quickly confessed as well, but he claimed that Ruth was the mastermind. Gray said that Ruth constantly complained about how her husband mistreated and ignored her. She wanted to leave him, but thought she would lose custody of her daughter because she had an affair. So she decided to kill Albert. She was the one who arranged the insurance policies and tricked Albert into signing the 3 policies. She had told him that there was just one policy for $1,000, but had to sign 3 pieces of paper. She also tried to kill him in at least 4 different ways. First, she put tablets of mercury in his coffee, but this just made him sick. She also took the labels off poisons and put them in the medicine cabinet. She was hoping he would accidentally drink one of them. Another time, she said something was wrong with the car. The car was in the garage and she started it. She had Albert get underneath the car to see what was wrong. While he was under the car, she slipped out of the garage and closed the door. She was hoping he'd die of carbon monoxide poisoning. but Albert realized something was wrong and crawled out of the garage. She told him it had been an accident, and he believed her. Then, another time, when he was napping on the couch, she disconnected a rubber tube from the gas heater. She then went for a walk. When she returned, he was on the front lawn, struggling to breathe. Supposedly, Albert never noticed that Ruth was trying to kill him. Gray admitted that he did buy the tools used to kill Albert. Gray said that Ruth left the door open for him, and he entered when the family was at the party. He hid in a spare bedroom where the window sash weight was under the pillow, along with a bottle of whiskey he was supposed to drink to help him gain courage. He had brought the chloroform and picture wire. When the Snyders got home, Albert went to bed. Ruth came into the spare bedroom and they had sex. Then they went into the main bedroom together. He struck Albert in the head the first time, and it didn't kill him. Instead, it woke up Albert, and they started fighting. Then Ruth attacked her husband with the weight. Gray said it was a blur, and he did not remember much else. He didn't know that he was shaking too much to tie up Albert, so Ruth did that. He said he lost the picture wire during the struggle, and if Albert had been strangled, then it was Ruth who strangled him. Both 32-year-old Ruth Snyder and 34-year-old Judd Gray were charged with murder. They were tried together. The trial opened on April 25, 1927. The crime had sparked the public's interest, and it was a media circus. There were lineups to get into the courtroom. Celebrities, including mystery author Mary Roberts Reinhardt and filmmaker D.W. Griffith, attended the trial. The media dubbed Ruth the granite woman, and they called Gray the putty man. However, some social commentators didn't understand the fascination with the case. It certainly wasn't the first time an unhappy wife and her lover murdered her husband. Also, the killers and victim were just considered everyday people who were not famous or notorious in any way. Another thing people noted was how terrible Ruth and Gray were at covering up the fact that they were the killers. Journalist Damien Runyon, who covered the case, called it the dumbbell murder, even though a dumbbell wasn't used in the murder. He called it that because they were so dumb. During the trial, both Ruth and Gray testified, and they blamed each other for the murder. The insurance salesman who wrote out the policies testified. He said that Ruth was the one who set it up. The trial lasted nearly 2 weeks. Then the jury deliberated for an hour and a half. Ruth Snyder and Judd Gray were both found guilty. They were both sentenced to death. Their execution date was scheduled for less than a year later, on January 12, 1928. 32-year-old Ruth Snyder was led to the electric chair in Sing Sing prison first. She became weak and nearly fainted when she saw the chair. Prison matrons who had worked with her on death row had to help her get into the chair. Ruth Snyder was pronounced dead at 11:06 p.m. 35-year-old Henry Judd Gray followed her minutes afterward. He was pronounced dead at 11:14 p.m. The next morning, many were shocked when they saw the front page of the New York Daily News. Under the headline, "Dead," was a photo of Ruth Snyder in the electric chair. It was the first photograph of an execution by an electric chair. As it is today in the United States, photographing executions was strictly prohibited. Seasoned photographer Tom Howard took the photo. The Chicago Tribune employed Howard while he was on loan to the Daily News that night. The owners of the two newspapers were cousins. Howard had a plate camera attached to his ankle. He had the cable running up his leg to a bulb in his pocket. When the execution started, he rested his ankle on his knee and squeezed the bulb. The bulb opened the camera shutter. He kept the shutter open for 6 seconds and then closed it. After the executions, he raced to the Daily News headquarters where the image was developed overnight. Supposedly, that edition of the Daily News sold out in 15 minutes. It is considered one of the most controversial and shocking photos ever taken. It has sparked a lot of debate regarding if the public should be able to witness an execution. People on both sides of the argument think there are benefits. People who are pro-death penalty think it would deter crimes. Anti-death penalty proponents think that people would be so disturbed after seeing an execution that they would oppose the death penalty. The camera used to take the infamous photo is now part of the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History. For decades, the murder of Albert Snyder has fascinated the public. It was the basis for James M. Cain's 1943 novel, Double Indemnity. The story was initially published in 1936 in serial form in Liberty magazine. The novel was adapted into the film Double Indemnity in 1944. It was nominated for 7 Academy Awards, but it did not take home any statues. However, today, Double Indemnity is widely regarded as not just one of the best film noirs, but also one of the best films ever made. Lafayette Andrew Jackson was born in Bath County, Kentucky in 1863. He went by his initials, L.A. After L.A. completed his schooling, he went to work for a burgeoning grocery store chain called Kroger Grocery Store and Baking Company. In 1891, when L.A. was 28 years old, he left Kroger's and he started his own grocery store in Indianapolis, Indiana, called Standard Grocery. 2 years later, L.A.'s wife, Mammy, gave birth to a son named Chester. L.A. was an incredibly driven man, and his hard work paid off. 19 years after opening his first store, he had opened 19 more. Chester grew up in the business, and as an adult, he continued to work under his father. In 1931, L.A. was 68 years old, and he was still running the company. One thing that L.A. hated was criminals. He kept a revolver in his office, which was in the first grocery store he opened in downtown Indianapolis. L.A. once told a newspaper, "Criminals get off too easy nowadays. If anyone pokes a gun at me, I'm going to let him have it. Maybe I'll get killed, but I've got to die sometime. Even if I am shot, I can still shoot." His words would later prove to be prophetic. On May 27, 1931, Charles Witt and Lewis Hamilton, who were both 25 years old, walked into the store where L.A. was working. Witt and Hamilton both had criminal records, and they were wanted fugitives. They had met in prison. Witt had killed a sheriff in rural Texas in 1927, and he was sentenced to life in prison. He escaped after only serving 3 years. Hamilton had been serving time in the same prison for robbery. Hamilton was paroled in June 1930, and he was supposed to check in with his parole officer regularly. But he absconded not long after he was paroled. When Witt and Hamilton walked into the store, they were both wearing dark suits and hats. One was armed with a sawed-off shotgun, and the other had a revolver. In the store that morning was L.A. and Chester. Hamilton and Witt demanded the money. What happened next is unclear. It's possible that L.A. shot first, or it's possible that either Witt or Hamilton fired first. What is known for sure is that L.A. and one of the gunmen exchanged fire. After L.A. fired one shot, Hamilton and Witt unleashed a barrage of bullets at him. Then they ran from the store without getting any money. The store was just 2 blocks from the police station. An officer heard the gunshots, and he ran to the store. He then got into a gunfight with Hamilton and Witt. The officer was hit, and he fell to the ground. 2 other police officers happened to be in the area, and they started firing at Witt and Hamilton. Witt and Hamilton managed to get into their car, and they drove off. Minutes later, an ambulance came and took LA and the wounded police officer to the hospital. The officer survived, but LA wasn't as lucky. He had been shot in the head and the abdomen. He survived for 36 hours, and then he was pronounced dead. Before he died, he told his surgeon, "They shot me down like a dog." Shortly after the attempted robbery, the police found the car that Witt and Hamilton were driving. There was blood inside of it, so the police knew at least one of the gunmen had been shot. At the time, the police did not know who killed LA. About a month later, on June 25th, the police pulled over a car just outside of downtown Indianapolis. The driver of the car was Charles Witt. They found a loaded gun in his car and discovered an unhealed bullet wound on his hip. He was arrested and brought to the police station. LA's son Chester and the police officer who was shot came to the police station. They both identified Witt as one of the shooters. That same day, Lewis Hamilton was arrested in Iola, Kansas. Chester traveled to Iola and identified Hamilton as the second shooter. Witt and Hamilton were both convicted of murder and sentenced to death. In November 1933, Charles Witt was executed via the electric chair. Lewis Hamilton followed suit 10 months later. He was executed in the same electric chair. After LA's murder, his eldest son, Chester, took over the company. Under Chester's leadership, the company grew exponentially, and Chester became a very wealthy man. In 1932, Chester met a woman named Marjorie O'Connell while he was shopping at a five and dime store in Indianapolis. At the time, Chester was 39 years old and married. At 22 years of age, Marjorie was 17 years younger. While Chester shopped, he and Marjorie started flirting. It wasn't long before they started a romantic relationship. Chester justified the affair by saying his wife had been sleeping with other men. In fact, Chester said that his wife had gotten pregnant during a time when they had not had sex for over a year. Chester and his wife had no children of their own. In November 1933, Chester's wife moved out of their home and Marjorie moved in. However, Marjorie wasn't very happy with the relationship. Chester, like his father, was a workaholic. He was often at work early in the morning and frequently returned home around midnight. Marjorie spent most of her time alone. But Chester's hard work paid off extremely well. He had grown the company his father started by over tenfold. By 1947, there were over 250 standard grocery stores. That same year, Chester sold the company to the National Tea Company, which was later bought out by A&P. It's not exactly clear how much money Chester had after the sale of the company. Chester was afraid of the IRS, and he didn't trust banks. So he kept large amounts of cash hidden in his house. What is known is that he purchased $14 million in coal stocks, $5 million in municipal bonds, and he had $1 million in cash, treasury bills, and other investments. When accounting for inflation, that is nearly $230 million in 2019. After he sold the company, Chester, who was in his mid-50s, retired. In 1952, 5 years after the company was sold, Marjorie was out to lunch with a friend. Her friend mentioned that she heard that Chester had divorced his wife. This was news to Marjorie. It turned out that Chester had secretly divorced his wife 7 years earlier. Marjorie then went home and confronted Chester. A few weeks later, in July 1952, Marjorie and Chester were married in a small ceremony. In his retirement, Chester struggled with his mental health. He was convinced that someone was going to murder him. He got professional help, and by 1954, he seemed to be stable. That year, he and Marjorie purchased a 7-bedroom ranch-style house on Spring Mill Drive in Indianapolis. After moving in, Chester and Marjorie traveled around the world. But then, Chester's physical health started to fail. Around the same time, people started to notice that Marjorie was mentally unstable. Some of her family members said that, in hindsight, she may have had schizophrenia. At the time, they just assumed she was a free-spirited rebel. As Marjorie got older, her mental illness got worse, and she became incredibly paranoid. Then, on August 18, 1970, Chester, who was 77, died of natural causes. Marjorie and Chester had been romantically involved for 38 years and married for 18 years. Marjorie did not attend Chester's funeral because of her mental condition. She thought that Chester had been lying about who he really was. When Chester died, he left all his money in stocks to Marjorie. In total, over $7 million was deposited into Marjorie's bank account, which already had $1 million in it. Chester had been paranoid about banks, so there was also cash hidden all over the house that he shared with Marjorie. Exactly how much money was hidden in the house isn't known, but it was suspected to be millions of dollars. After Chester died, Marjorie started to leave the house less and less. If she did leave the house, it was only between noon on Sunday and dusk on Tuesday. Every week she would buy a dozen roses from a local flower shop. She would pay with a $20 or $50 Federal Reserve note that was printed in 1932. Because the notes were rare, they were worth 4 or 5 times more than their face value. She never accepted the change when she purchased the flowers. She would also buy way more food than she needed. Her kitchen became so full of food that she barely had room to cook. For example, it was not unusual for her to have 150 pounds of coffee, 200 dozen cookies, and 50 loaves of bread in her kitchen. Marjorie stocked up on the food because she thought that Armageddon was imminent. She was sure that God and Jesus were coming to earth to raise the dead. She would also buy jewelry and then gift wrap it. She added tags that read, "To God from Marjorie." Other gifts were for Jesus. Marjorie also suspected that demons and devils were trying to enter her home. So she put aluminum foil over the windows and over the vents. In 1974 and 1975, a trust officer named Herbert Biddle, who worked at the Indiana National Bank, was in charge of investing Marjorie's money. While Marjorie wasn't mentally well, her mind was sharp in other ways. She had an excellent memory, and she was very capable when it came to reading documents like financial records. Sometime in late 1975, Marjorie discovered that Biddle was embezzling money from her. On December 31st, 1975, Biddle quit his job at the bank and he got a job with a law firm in Indianapolis. 9 days after that, Marjorie took a rare trip out of the house and went to the bank. She withdrew $500,000 in cash. Security guards loaded the bundles of cash into the trunk of her car. The huge withdrawal triggered a review of Marjorie's bank account. Bank officials then realized that over $600,000 was missing from her account. A week after her first withdrawal, Marjorie withdrew another $500,000 in cash, and then the week after that, she withdrew $1 million. The money was always loaded into grocery bags that were in her trunk. Officials at the bank, and even the district attorney and a judge, tried to discourage Marjorie from withdrawing all her money. They pointed out that it wasn't safe. They said that someone could break into her home and steal the money. They pointed out that she could very possibly be hurt or killed during the robbery. Marjorie was adamant that she wanted to keep the money at home. She said she was a free citizen and she was allowed to do whatever she wanted with her money. She said she wasn't worried about being robbed because she had 3 burglar alarms and God would protect her. The FBI then investigated Herbert Biddle for embezzlement. On April 15, 1976, Biddle confessed to stealing $625,000 from Marjorie. He would later be sentenced to 2 3-year concurrent sentences. After Biddle was arrested, Marjorie withdrew the rest of her money and closed out her account. Over 3 months, she had withdrawn over $7.8 million. Accounting for inflation, that is over $35 million in 2019. Marjorie was carefree when it came to spending her money. One day, she was driving her Cadillac. It broke down on the side of the road, and Marjorie had to call a tow truck. She told the tow truck driver that he could keep the Cadillac. She then went and bought 2 brand new Cadillacs, one to drive in the summer and the other to drive in the winter. She paid for both cars in full, in cash. On May 16, 1976, a neighbor of Marjorie's called the police. He had heard screaming coming from her home. The police arrived at her home minutes later. Marjorie told the responding officers that she was fine and told them to leave. The police had no reason to look around her home, so they left. Then, 7 months later, in December 1976, the prosecutor's office got an unusual phone call. The caller was a man who claimed to be a minister. The minister said that a man he knew talked to him about a woman who lived in Indianapolis who was supposedly a witch. The man had told him that the witch could bury a $1 bill in her yard and then come back the next week and dig it up, and it would be a $100 bill. The minister said that he knew someone was planning on robbing the witch. The minister also said that the man had told him that another pair of men had stolen $800,000 and some jewelry from the witch already. The prosecutor decided to do some investigating, and he learned that no one had reported $800,000 being stolen. But the prosecutor thought that the minister's story was too odd to at least not have some elements of truth to it. So he called the minister back and he asked to talk to the man who told him about the witch. The minister set up the meeting for the next day. The man who talked about the witch was named Jerry Hornick. Hornick told the prosecutor that his brother worked at the flower shop where Marjorie Jackson bought her flowers. Hornick said that his brother told him that Marjorie was a wealthy woman who kept a lot of cash in her home. Hornick then told two of his friends, Wally Bergen and Douglas Green, about Marjorie, and they were the ones who robbed her of $800,000. Hornick said that he knew that they had robbed her because they gave him $20,000. After talking to Hornick, the prosecutor called the FBI. An agent called Marjorie and asked if anyone had stolen money from her. She told him that no money had been stolen. She said that if anyone did say they stole money from her, they were lying. The FBI agent and the prosecutor weren't convinced that no one had stolen money from her, so they kept investigating. They asked the police to arrest Green and Bergen, but they had problems tracking them down. They did locate Bergen's father, and the prosecutor had him testify in front of the grand jury in January 1977. He said that he was aware that his son had stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars from somewhere, but he didn't know from where. After the grand jury hearing, progress on the case stopped. There were two major roadblocks. The first was that the police couldn't locate Bergen and Green. The second roadblock was Marjorie Jackson. She denied that anyone had stolen money from her. The prosecutor was worried that if she was called to testify in front of the grand jury, she might say there wasn't a robbery and the case against Bergen and Green would fall apart. Also, since Marjorie denied that there was a robbery and didn't want to press charges, looking for Green and Bergen wasn't the police's top priority. So the case became stagnant. Just before dawn on May 7, 1977, about 5 months after the grand jury hearing, one of Marjorie's neighbors called 911. Marjorie's house was on fire. The fire department arrived and they put out the fire. In the kitchen, they found the dead body of 66-year-old Marjorie Jackson lying in a pool of dried blood. The medical examiner later determined that she had been shot once in the abdomen with a .22 caliber rifle. The medical examiner said that Marjorie was probably killed 48 hours before her body was found. So the killer, or killers, returned 2 days after the murder to start the fire. The police concluded that the motive for the murder was most likely robbery. The police thought that the fire was set to cover up the robbery and the murder. The police found some irony in the fact that the killer, or killers, tried to cover up the crime by setting the house on fire. Since Marjorie was a recluse, no one probably would have realized she was dead for weeks or possibly even months. Investigators looked through the house and found some oddities. The dining room table was set with expensive dinnerware. The firefighters said that the table looked like the homeowner was hosting royalty. The table was surrounded with gifts that were for God and Jesus. It's believed that Marjorie had set the table to welcome God and Jesus. Investigators continued to look through the house, and they found piles of cash hidden throughout. They knew that Marjorie had withdrawn $8 million from the bank. She also possibly had millions of dollars stored away in the house before she withdrew the money. The police counted the money found in the house, and it was about $5 million. so at least $3 million was missing. The police immediately had a pair of suspects, Wally Bergen and Douglas Green. The police thought that since the pair got away with robbing Marjorie a year before, they did it again. But before the police could arrest Green and Bergen, another suspect was brought to their attention. In the days after the murder, the crime made headlines around Indiana, and it was the top story on each news broadcast. A car dealer who read about the murder took note of a man named Manuel Robinson who was looking to buy an expensive car in cash. The dealer said that he was suspicious because Robinson was already driving a car that was brand new. The police knew who Manuel Robinson was. At the time, he was on parole for robbery. The police brought Robinson and his girlfriend to the police station for questioning. They searched Robinson's body, and he was carrying several pieces of jewelry, and he was wearing some expensive rings. He also had over $2,000 cash in his pockets. Robinson's girlfriend gave the police permission to search their apartment. In the apartment, the police found some more jewelry and some expensive items that had been recently purchased. They also found more than $1.6 million in cash. The police confronted Robinson with what they found in his apartment. He admitted that he and a partner named Howard Willard, who went by the name Billy Joe, had robbed Marjorie Jackson. The two were an unlikely pair. Manuel Robinson was described as a hip black man who lived in the inner city, whereas Billy Joe Willard was described as an ignorant hillbilly by the deputy prosecutor. Willard had learned about Marjorie Jackson from Jerry Hornick. Hornick was the man who told Douglas Green and Wally Bergen about Marjorie. Willard had met Hornick one night at a bar, and Hornick told him that Green and Bergen had stolen $800,000 from Marjorie, and they got away with it. Not long after meeting Hornick, Willard met Robinson at a party of a mutual friend. Then they planned the robbery together. After Robinson identified Willard as his accomplice, the police went to arrest him, but he had fled. The sheriff of Marion County, where Indianapolis is located, was a man named Donald Gilman, who went by the nickname Diamond Don. Gilman was a millionaire. He made his money from running health spas and from gambling in Las Vegas before he was appointed sheriff. He had the nickname Diamond Don because he wore diamond rings and he wore a vest studded with diamonds. Gilman held a press conference and he told Willard to give himself up. He said that since it was public knowledge that he had over $1 million on him, bad people might be looking for him so that they could steal the money from him. Gilman said, for his own safety, Willard should turn himself in. The press conference was broadcast across the country. Several days later, on May 19th, Willard tried to purchase an RV in Tempe, Arizona. He wanted to pay for the $35,000 vehicle in cash. The RV salesman said he would get the RV ready for him, but it wouldn't be ready until the next morning. The salesman actually had the RV ready, but he decided to delay the sale because he was suspicious. After Willard left the sales lot, the salesman called the police. The police in Tempe knew to be on the lookout for a man spending a large amount of cash. The police interviewed the RV salesman and they showed him a picture of Willard. The RV salesman said he was the man who tried to buy the RV. The Tempe police called in the FBI and Willard was arrested the next day. When Willard was arrested, he was with his ex-wife, Marge Pollitt. She was arrested as well. The FBI asked Paula to cooperate with the investigation. Overcome with guilt, she agreed to help, and she led the FBI to a desert north of Phoenix. 2 FBI agents started digging in the area where she indicated. Buried 5 feet below the surface, they found 2 cardboard boxes with $1.6 million in them. Paul explained to the FBI that after Marjorie's murder, she and Willard drove to Phoenix. They traveled to Phoenix to meet the famous lawyer, F. Lee Bailey, who was working on a trial there. Supposedly, Bailey was the one who told Willard to bury the money in the desert. Bailey apparently suggested separating the money and burying it in 4 or 5 different places. He supposedly suggested splitting up the money and burying it in different locations in case someone demanded to know the location of the money. They could lead them to one spot where the money was buried, but they wouldn't get the majority of the money. Bailey adamantly denied saying this. Bailey said he told Willard he would represent him if he turned the money over to the authorities. Billy Joe Willard and Manuel Robinson both accused each other of shooting Marjorie. They both admitted to stealing money on May 5th, which was the night Marjorie was killed, and then coming back 2 nights later and stealing more money. Then they set the fire to cover up any evidence that they were in the house. Willard went to trial first in November 1977. He was found guilty of murder and he was sentenced to life in prison. He was also sentenced to 5 years for conspiracy and 10 years for transporting stolen money across state lines. His ex-wife, Marge Pollitt, was sentenced to 5 years in prison. Manuel Robinson went to trial next, and he was ultimately found guilty of burglary, conspiracy to commit burglary, and arson. He was found not guilty of armed robbery and murder. He was sentenced to 10 to 20 years in prison. Several weeks after Billy Joe Willard's trial, Wally Bergen and Douglas Green were arrested for stealing $800,000 from Marjorie Jackson in May 1976. The police collected $263,000 that was still in their possession. It turned out that they had blown through most of the money in several months. They spent it on vacations, partying, and they went on several shopping sprees. Also, some of their friends found out that they stole the money and they blackmailed them. Their friends kept quiet in exchange for expensive cars. Douglas Green was also a victim of a home invasion himself. 2 career criminals had heard he stole money, so they stole $150,000 from him. Green also bought a farmhouse for $45,000 and then paid a contractor $20,000 to fix it up. Then a few months after buying the farmhouse, Green burned it down for the insurance money. But he only got $40,000 for the insurance claim. Green and Bergen pleaded guilty to conspiracy and burglary, and they were sentenced to 2 to 14 years in prison. Even the men who robbed Green of $150,000 were arrested and convicted, but they just received suspended sentences. Only one major mystery remained. It's not clear how much money was in Marjorie Jackson's house. Some people speculate that as much as $15 million was stashed around the house. Only about $8 million was recovered. That leaves about $7 million unaccounted for. The fire didn't cause too much damage, so the police don't think the money was lost in the fire. Instead, They think at least some of the money was stolen. They believe at least $1.6 million was stolen and is still missing. The police believe this because they have the serial numbers of the bills that Marjorie withdrew from the bank, and the bills with those serial numbers have never been found. So it's suspected that someone stole at least $1.6 million, but millions more could have been stolen. The police have no idea who stole the money. One theory is that someone broke into Marjorie's house and stole the money before she was murdered, and she simply didn't report it. After all, Marjorie didn't report Herbert Biddle's embezzlement, nor did she report the robbery committed by Douglas Green and Wally Bergen. Another theory about the stolen money comes from an investigative reporter named Don Devereaux. Devereaux has been nominated twice for the Pulitzer Prize. He started looking into the case in 2015 because he received a tip from someone who worked in law enforcement. He got the case file from the FBI under the Freedom of Information Act. Devereaux had previously filed 50 different Freedom of Information Act requests from the FBI for a variety of cases. The file of Marjorie Jackson's murder was much different from every other case file he has ever received. Part of the file had been destroyed and pages were missing. Devereaux thinks that the missing information implicates an FBI agent who worked in the Phoenix field office. 2 agents stationed in Phoenix were the ones who dug out the money that Billy Joe Willard buried. Devereaux pointed out that Willard's ex-wife said that F. Lee Bailey told them to bury the money in 4 or 5 locations. The FBI reported that all the money they found came from one location. So it's possible that at least one of the agents went to the desert and dug up more money that was buried in a different location. Or it's possible he skimmed some money from the one location where they found the money. Why Devereaux thinks that one of the FBI agents stole the money is because of something he found in the FBI's file on the case. Most of the time, when Devereaux would get a file from the FBI, the names of the agents that worked on the case would be redacted. But in Marjorie Jackson's case file, the name of one of the agents was not redacted. Devereaux said that if the name had been left unredacted once, it was possibly an accident. But the agent's name was left unredacted in the file 6 times. Devereaux thought that this was extraordinary. He thinks that someone in the Phoenix field office was suspicious of the agent and purposely left the name unredacted. So Devereaux looked into the agent's property and financial records. The agent's financial records show that sometime after the money was dug up in the desert, the agent transferred some money from a Swiss bank account to a bank account in the country of Netherlands Antilles. The money was then used to buy valuable properties in the Phoenix area. The ownership of the properties was then transferred to an offshore holding company. Devereaux thinks that the agent was the owner of the holding company. Devereaux was never able to ask the agent about the money because by the time he started investigating, the agent had passed away. The name of the FBI agent Devereaux suspects of stealing the money has never been made public. Devereaux asked the FBI why some of the file was destroyed, but they did not give him an explanation. He thinks it is because they are trying to protect the reputation of the FBI agent. Some people think that Devereaux's theory is just a made-up conspiracy theory. Other people think it's a wild theory, but it's a plausible theory. They point out that the rest of the case was very strange too. Because of the colorful characters involved in the case, The case has been compared to an Elmore Leonard novel and a Coen Brothers movie. A final theory is that not all the money that Billy Joe Willard buried was found. There could still be money buried in the desert outside of Phoenix. But those who go looking for the money should be warned. Some people think because of the tragedies connected to the money that the standard grocery chain fortune is cursed. The robbery at Marjorie Jackson's house is considered the largest heist of a residence in American history. Shannon Hercutt lived in Sevierville, Tennessee. She was a successful realtor and she owned a business that rented out cabins. Shannon was also an active member of her community. She was a driving force in getting a large playground installed in one of the city's parks. On August 3, 2009, the police were notified to an OnStar alert that Shannon's 2007 Cadillac Escalade had been involved in an accident. The police went to the area where the alert came from and they found Shannon's SUV at the bottom of a cliff. It was too late to help 40-year-old Shannon Hercutt. She was already dead. At first, Shannon's death was ruled an accident. Then 11 days later, the police announced that Shannon's death was actually a homicide. The change in status came because of what they found at Shannon's home and the autopsy results. The police first visited Shannon's home 3 days after she was found dead. Inside her home, they found broken bottles, a baseball bat, and there was blood splattered on the refrigerator. The police have never made the cause of death public, but Shannon's family has said that they believe she was beaten to death with a baseball bat. After she was killed in her home, she was then placed into the SUV and driven out to the cliff. Her body was then placed in the driver's seat, and then the SUV was guided over the cliff. One of the early suspects in the case was Shannon's own father, Ted Hercutt. However, Ted had an alibi. At the time of the murder, Ted was in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina with his wife, his other daughter, Penny, who is also Shannon's sister, and his grandchild. In the 3 months after the murder, no arrests were made. Then 3 months after the murder, someone fired a gun at Shannon's business. No one was hurt, but the front window was broken. The police never discovered who shot at the business or if it was connected to Shannon's murder. Then in 2014, 5 years after the killing, Shannon's sister, Penny, and her father, Ted, appeared on the Dr. Phil show. The show aired in January 2015. On the show, Penny accused Ted of hiring someone to kill Shannon. Penny said that Ted and Shannon had been fighting at the time of Shannon's murder. She also said that Ted wanted to take over Shannon's business. Ted adamantly denied being involved in his daughter's murder. Ted said that even before Shannon's death was ruled a homicide, he did not think it was an accident. Because of his belief that it wasn't an accident, he pushed for an autopsy. He asked Penny why would he ask for an autopsy if he was involved in her murder. Ted admitted that he was a suspect, but the sheriff's department had cleared him. If Ted was involved with the murder of his daughter, he took that information with him to the grave. He died in November 2017 at the age of 70. The police have never found any evidence that he was involved in the murder of his daughter. Many family members, including his own daughter and Shannon's sister, Penny, are convinced that he hired someone to beat Shannon to death. They think he was a pathological liar who was obsessed with money. A reward is being offered for information leading to an arrest in Shannon's murder. Unfortunately, at the time of this video, the murder of Teresa Hercutt is considered cold. According to her parents, Premelia Lal was a popular student. Her father called the 18-year-old a go-getter. She was on the track team and recently graduated high school with a 3.87 GPA. Premelia became good friends with 21-year-old Naegle when he moved to Longmont, Colorado. She was considered a mentor to Gally and encouraged him to pursue higher education. On the evening of September 16, 2013, Premelia and her 12-year-old cousin snuck into her uncle's home. The two were on their way to a high school football game, but thought it would be fun to scare Gally and Premelia's 15-year-old brother, Pernell. Her uncle was moving, and the house was mostly empty. Gally was tasked with watching the house. He and Pernell were in the basement of the house when Premelia and her cousin snuck in. Premelia and her cousin hid in a closet on the main floor and started making noises. Around 8 p.m., Gally heard the sounds as he played video games in the basement with Pernell. He grabbed his gun, thinking it was an intruder. Pernell came with him as backup. Gally handed him a gun. Premelia jumped out of the closet, attempting to scare the young man. That's when Gally, thinking it was an intruder, fired at Premelia. She was shot once in the chest. Premelia was rushed to the emergency room at the Longmont United Hospital by Gally, her brother, and her cousin. Sadly, the 18-year-old died an hour after being shot. Premelia's death shook her family and friends. Gally, a gun enthusiast before the shooting, told Premelia's father that he would never touch a gun again. Premelia's father, Praveen, didn't want Gally to face jail time. He understood the shooting was an accident, and he was close to Gally. He is like an older son to me, Praveen said to the press. He also thought that the guilt of killing his friend and mentor would be enough of a life sentence. Police questioned Gally and confirmed the shooting was an accident. Speaking to the press, Longmont Police Commander Jeff Satter referred to Premelia's death as unintended and extremely tragic. The Boulder County Coroner's Office categorized Premelia's murder as a homicide, but Gally wasn't charged with Premelia's death. Instead, he was arrested on charges of suspicions of child abuse, reckless endangerment, and permitting a juvenile to have a gun as he gave a firearm to Premelia's underage brother. The outcome of those charges were never made public. Premelia's family honors her life by serving food to the less fortunate every November, Premelia's birthday month, at the Outreach United Resource Center, also known as the R Center. She's looking from the heavens and I think she's happy, said Premelia's mother, Angela Lal. When she was 10 years old, I remember her saying, I want to help people, especially with food. November 2022 marked the 10th consecutive year the Lals helped serve food to the people in the community. John Lesko was born in November 1958 in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Lesko never knew his father. He was one of 6 children, all from different fathers. Lesko's mother neglected her children. She sent them out to steal. Men she sexually knew abused Lesko and his brother. The burden of motherhood ended up being too much for his mother. She placed him and his brother in an orphanage when he was around 8. While in the orphanage's care, Lesko's brother was sexually abused. Lesko stayed in the orphanage for a few years. When he was 14, he went to live with his grandmother. As an adult, Lesko served in the Marines for about 2 years. He was dishonorably discharged after going AWOL in 1978. When he returned to Pittsburgh in 1979, Lesko bounced from job to job. In November of that year, Lesko met Michael Tavaglia while working at the Allegheny Airport. Tavaglia had lived a relatively typical life. He was an average student and played saxophone in the school band. However, his father was strict and his religious mother was often emotionally detached. Tavaglia believed his parents favored his older brother. Together, Lesko and Tavaglia bonded with drugs and alcohol. They also allegedly tortured animals. Lesko's anger would eventually go beyond that. He wanted to lash out at a world that he felt was so cruel to him and his brother. On December 27, 1979, Lesko and Tavaglia, both 21 years old, claimed their first victim at a downtown Pittsburgh hotel. While in the bar, the pair believed that 49-year-old Peter Lovato had made a sexual pass at Tavaglia. The men lured Lovato into the parking lot and forced the unemployed security guard into the trunk of his car. Then they drove to the Loyal Hannah Creek. They tried leaving him in the trunk and pushing the car into the water, but Lovato managed to escape. The men hunted him down and shot him twice in the head and once in the chest. His body was found 2 days later. 4 days later, on January 1, 1980, 26-year-old Marlene Newcomer picked up Lesko and Tavaglia as she left a New Year's Eve party. The pair were hitchhiking on Route 66 around 1:30 a.m. when the single mother offered them a ride. They handcuffed her and took her car to Indiana County, where they held up a convenience store. The police found her body in her car in a downtown Pittsburgh parking garage the next day. She had been shot to death. On the day Newcomer's body was found, Lesko and Tavaglia struck again. 32-year-old William Nichols, a church organist, had recently purchased a new sports car. Tavaglia, Lesko, and another person, Ricky Rutherford, a 15-year-old runaway, waited in the alley near his car. The three men surprised Nichols as he climbed into his car. Tavaglia shot Nichols in the arm, then they all got into the car and took off. During the drive, Lesko beat and taunted Nichols, calling him queer and asking him if he wanted to perform oral sex on them. Lesko punched Nichols until he lost consciousness. When they pulled into a wooded area, the men gagged Nichols with a scarf. The men also handcuffed Nichols and tied his leg with a belt. Rutherford went looking for a rock. Lesko and Tavaglia beat and tortured Nichols. Then they dragged his body to a hole in the ice that was covering Blue Spruce Lake. Rutherford had found a rock, and they used it to weigh his body down. Nichols' body was pulled from the icy river a few days later. Early on the morning of January 3rd, Lesko, Tavaglia, and Rutherford cruised the outskirts of Pittsburgh in Nichols' stolen sports car. The trio drove past Leonard Miller, an Apollo police officer, stationed in his patrol car outside of a convenience store. Tavaglia, who was driving, tried to get Miller's attention by speeding past him and beeping the horn. It took 3 attempts for the sports car to get the officer's attention. Officer Miller chased after the men. He managed to force the car off the road. As Miller approached on foot, Tavaglia rolled down the window and shot Miller twice with a .38 caliber pistol. The officer returned fire to the car, shattering the passenger side of the windshield. The 3 men sped off as Miller radioed for help. The 21-year-old police officer died at the scene. Miller had only been a full-time officer for 3 days. After the shooting, the men returned to Pittsburgh. They hid the gun with a friend. The friend turned the gun over to the police, who arrested Lesko and Tavaglia later that evening. The men admitted to killing the officer. Lesko and Tavaglia were jointly tried in January 1981. Their defense strategy was to avoid first-degree murder by claiming the killing of Officer Miller was not premeditated. They claimed the shooting was accidental, as the gun's hammer slipped as Tavaglia aimed at the officer. Ricky Rutherford, the third man in the car, had his charges dropped in exchange for testifying against Lesko and Tavaglia. In early 1981, a jury found the men guilty of first-degree murder. On February 3, 1981, Lesko and Tavaglia were given death sentences for Miller's murder. They were to die in the electric chair. Lesko and Tavaglia also pleaded guilty to the murders of Lovato, Nichols, and Newcomer. Over the next 40 years, Tavaglia's execution was scheduled and then stayed 4 times by 3 different governors. In 1996, an appeals court vacated his death sentence. However, the courts reinstated that sentence in 2005. In prison, the 2 men became religious. Tavaglia would never see his death sentence go through. He died of natural causes in 2017. He was 59 years old. Lesko's death sentence was scheduled and stayed over 5 times. In 1991, his death sentence was vacated by the appeals court, only to be reinstated in 1995. At the time of this video, Lesko remains on death row. During his appeals, he has argued his defense was ineffective for not letting him testify, and some of the evidence was unavailable to his lawyers. He can take his case to the Supreme Court. John Lesko is one of Pennsylvania's longest-serving death row inmates. Officer Leonard Miller is still remembered in the community. Monuments, buildings, and scholarships have been created in his name, and more than 40 years after his death, a memorial service is held every 5 years. Chad Oulson was born in September 1970 in Alton, Illinois. He joined the Navy and served in Desert Storm. He won several awards for his conduct. After serving in the Navy, he worked as a finance manager at a motorcycle dealership in Sanford, Florida. Chad was big into motocross and dirt bikes. In early 2014, he had been with his wife, Nicole, for 7 years. The couple had a 22-month-old daughter, Alexis. On the afternoon of January 13, 2014, Chad and Nicole decided to see the movie Lone Survivor at the Cobb Grove 16 Theater in West Chapel, Florida. They left their daughter, Alexis, with a babysitter. Alexis wasn't feeling well, so Chad was texting with the babysitter. Sitting behind Chad and Nicole was 71-year-old Curtis Reeves and his wife. Reeves was a retired police chief and former SWAT captain. What exactly happened between the 2 men isn't clear because witness accounts differ. Just before the preview started, there was an announcement asking patrons to turn off their cell phones. Chad did not do this because he was still talking to the babysitter. Reeves said they politely asked him to turn off his cell phone. Nicole and several other people said that Reeves wasn't polite, and it sounded like Reeves ordered him to turn off his phone. Chad explained that he was talking to a babysitter about his sick daughter, and he continued to text. He possibly swore at Reeves. Reeves got up and started to walk down the row. He kicked the back of Chad's chair as he left. One patron said that Reeves was agitated and aggressive. Reeves walked out of the theater to speak to a manager. He returned a few minutes later, alone. By the time he had returned, Chad had put his phone away. Reeves got back into his seat and said to Chad he wouldn't have had to say anything to the manager if he knew Chad was going to put his phone away. Chad was annoyed that Reeves told the manager, and the 2 men exchanged more words. Chad stood up and either threw some of Reeves' popcorn or his bag of popcorn in his face. As seen on surveillance footage, Reeves immediately pulled out a .380 caliber handgun and pulled the trigger. Nicole's hand was on Chad's chest. The bullet struck her finger and went into her husband's chest. After shooting Chad, Reeves calmly sat down, put his gun in his lap, and stared straight ahead. An off-duty officer, who happened to be in the same theater, came and took the gun away from him. 43-year-old Chad Oulson was taken to the hospital. He was pronounced dead hours later. Reeves was arrested and charged with second-degree murder. Reeves' lawyers argued that his actions were sheltered by Florida's controversial Stand Your Ground law. The law states that if a person reasonably believes their life is being imminently threatened, they can use deadly force instead of first retreating. In March 2017, there was a hearing if the charges against Reeves would be dismissed because his actions were protected under the Stand Your Ground law. The judge ruled that Reeves' actions were not protected by the law. However, he could argue self-defense when he went to trial. Because of appeals and motions filed by Reeves' lawyer and the pandemic, Reeves didn't go to trial until 8 years after the murder. During that time, Reeves had been under house arrest. Chad's family accused the lawyer of intentionally delaying the trial. When Curtis Reeves went to trial in February 2022, he was 79 years old. At the trial, an audio recording of Reeves' interview with the police was played. He said that Reeves kept yelling. Reeves said whatever he was saying was threatening. It was enough for me to look for a way out. My wife said we should have just moved. Reeves testified on his own behalf, and he said in all his years of law enforcement, including being a SWAT captain, he had never encountered someone so out of control. He also said, "No one has ever scared me. This guy scared me." He pointed out that he was a 71-year-old man with physical ailments, and Chad was 43, 6'4", and weighed 270 pounds. The prosecution argued that Reeves was not some fragile egg. Instead, he had an alpha male mindset. He liked ordering people around. He got an adrenaline rush from being a police officer and a SWAT commander. When Chad wouldn't do what he said, it challenged him. Then Chad threw popcorn in his face, and it humiliated him. So he murdered him. It was not an act of self-defense. The prosecution also pointed out that Reeves worked in the Robbery/Homicide Bureau, Fugitive Apprehension, and SWAT. During that time, he never fired his gun. But then he said an unarmed man in a movie theater with his wife was the scariest person he had ever encountered. The prosecution said that seemed unreal. The trial lasted just over 2 weeks. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. They found Curtis Reeves not guilty. Chad Oulson's family was outraged by the verdict. A month after the verdict, Curtis Reeves spoke to ABC's Nightline. He said he felt sadness for Chad's family. He felt he had no choice but to defend himself in what he called the vicious attack. Reeves said, "I wish that none of this would have happened at all, but I don't feel like an instigator." In 1981, Henry Walsh was 91 years old, and he lived in Ormskirk, Lincolnshire, England. Walsh was a widower. To keep busy, he ran a hardware store in the mornings. He lived alone in the rear of the shop. On August 14, 1981, Walsh's daughter-in-law found him stabbed to death. The 91-year-old was hanging on coat hooks on the back of the door in his living quarters. The murder weapon was a carving knife, which was embedded in his body. The knife had gone through his body and into the door. Altogether, he had been stabbed 11 times. A ligature was around his neck and his jaw was broken. The police believe the motive behind the murder was a robbery. Walsh was known to hide money around his home and shop. The police believe the killer tortured Walsh, hoping he would reveal the location of the money. But Walsh didn't reveal where he hid his money. The police found £1,800 hidden in his home. Less than a week later, 18-year-old Andrew Dawson was arrested. Dawson was born in Ormskirk in 1962. He was one of 6 children. His family was low income, and sometimes things were tough. However, in many ways, they were a typical English family. Several people described Dawson as entitled. If he wanted something, he would take it. Dawson had a criminal record. He had been arrested once but charged with many crimes. This included driving a stolen motorcycle, breaking into a school and stealing alcohol that was for a parent-teacher association event, stealing from 2 shops, and vandalism. When asked why he committed these crimes, he said he was bored, immature, and frustrated that he couldn't get a job. In February 1981, Dawson was sentenced to 6 months in a detention center. The police focused on him in the murder investigation because a friend had called the police and told them that Dawson had confessed to him. Dawson confessed to the murder while in police custody. He said he was desperate for money because he had spent his rent money on alcohol. Walsh would not tell him where the money was hidden, and he ended up killing him. In March 1982, 19-year-old Andrew Dawson pleaded guilty to murder, and he was sentenced to life in prison. Dawson spent 17 years in prison, and he was paroled in 1999 at age 36. He settled in Derby, England. He got married and had 2 children, but the marriage didn't last and they divorced. He also had problems staying out of trouble. In 2003, 2004, and 2007, he was sent back to prison for violating the terms of his parole. In July 2010, Dawson lived alone in a flat outside of Derby. On July 25, 2010, the police were called to the flat of 66-year-old John David Matthews, who went by Dave. He worked at a restaurant, and the people he worked with were concerned because he had not come to work for a while. The police went to his flat. In the bathtub, they found his badly decomposed body. It's believed he had been dead for at least 2 weeks. The pathologist determined he had been stabbed 18 times. Early in the investigation, the police talked to his neighbors. They discovered that one of his neighbors was Andrew Dawson, but Dawson was nowhere to be found. The police got into his apartment and found it empty. There was a strong smell of bleach in the flat. The police were able to determine that Matthews was murdered on July 10th. Hours after he murdered Matthews, Dawson took his children out for the day. Dawson moved out of the apartment the next day. The police talked to the other neighbors, and they said that Dawson often went to Matthews' flat to use his washing machine. So the police think that was the ruse he used to get into Matthews' flat. Once he was in the flat, he attacked the 66-year-old man and stabbed him to death. He put him in the bathtub and poured bleach on the body to dispose of any possible forensic evidence. He also left yellow dishwashing gloves in the bathtub. The police talked to all of Matthews and Dawson's neighbors, except for one, 58-year-old Paul Hancock. They decided to do a welfare check on him and entered the apartment 5 days after Matthews' body was found. In the bathtub was Hancock's dead body. He had been stabbed 22 times. It turned out that the same day the police discovered Dave Matthews' body, Dawson was in Hancock's apartment. He went downstairs and talked to a police officer for a few minutes. Afterward, he grabbed his bag and got into a taxi. The pathologist was not able to determine a time of death for Hancock, but it was after Matthews died. He may have been killed on the day Matthews' body was found, and that was why Dawson was in Hancock's apartment. Or he may have killed Hancock a few days earlier, and he was in Hancock's flat that day cleaning up. It appeared he was in the process of cleaning up the apartment when the police discovered Matthews' body. Dawson's clothes were also found in the bleach-filled bathtub. That same afternoon, Andrew Dawson was found 200 miles away in Whitehaven. A police officer found him sleeping on a bench on the beach. While he was being arrested, he managed to break away and he ran. He jumped into the water and tried to swim away, but he realized the futility of it. He eventually swam to shore, but he wasn't ready to give himself up. He acted aggressively with the police, so he was shot with a taser. He was then arrested. In Dawson's flat, the police found a notebook with a page torn out of it. There were indents in the paper below the page that had been ripped out. The forensic team was able to decipher what had been written on the page. It was a poorly written poem in which Dawson confesses to the murder of Dave Matthews. He wrote about Rose being in the flat. He then signed it, The Angel of Mercy. What the police noted was that Matthews' pillow was a rose, which the police thought was out of place. In Matthews' flat, they found a rubber glove, but a piece of the thumb was missing. The police searched the flat, and in one of the drawers, they found the missing piece. The police believed it was ripped when Dawson was looking for money and other valuables. The piece of glove was tested, and Dawson's DNA was found on it. Dawson confessed to the murders. He said he didn't really want to kill Dave Matthews, but he felt the urge to do it. But then he later recanted his confession. In July 2011, 48-year-old Andrew Dawson pleaded not guilty. But then hours later, he changed his plea to guilty. He was given a whole life sentence, so he'll most likely die in prison. At the time of this video, Andrew Dawson is 61 years old. Bridalplasty was a controversial reality show that aired on E! In 2010. On the show, 12 women competed to win their dream wedding and extensive plastic surgery. The idea was that the bride would look perfect for a perfect wedding. One of the contestants on the show was 29-year-old Lisa Marie Naegle from San Pedro, California. San Pedro is a neighborhood in Los Angeles. Lisa Marie was eliminated in the 7th episode. Many people thought Bridalplasty was in bad taste and it had poor ratings, so it was cancelled after a season. Lisa Marie went back to her life after the show. She worked as a nurse and she taught nursing classes. On July 31st, 2011, Lisa Marie married Derek Harriman. Derek worked at the Port of Los Angeles. The couple wanted to have children, but they were having problems conceiving, so they were going to a fertility clinic for treatment. On the night of Saturday, December 17, 2006, Derek was working. 36-year-old Lisa Marie told him that she was going to a friend's 40th birthday at a beer hall in Torrance, California. She said she probably wouldn't be home late because she had to teach in the morning. Derek arrived home after midnight. He was surprised to find that Lisa Marie wasn't there. She called him after 2 a.m. on Sunday and told him that she was going to stop for food and then she was going to head home. Derek went to sleep. Hours later, he woke up and Lisa Marie still wasn't home. He tried to call her, but she didn't answer. That morning, she didn't show up for work, which was very unlike her. Derek talked to Lisa Marie's brother, Rafael Chavez, and learned that he did not go to the party with Lisa Marie. Derek tried to report his wife missing, but the police told him she needed to be missing for 72 hours. Lisa Marie's brother, Rafael, and her sister, Danielle Naegle, immediately started looking for her. They learned that she had gone to the party with one of her nursing students, 34-year-old Jackie Jerome Rogers. Lisa Marie had told her siblings that Rogers was a friend who was gay. The siblings asked Rogers if he knew what happened to Lisa Marie. He said that they went to the beer hall together, but she went to an after party without him. He went home alone after the bar. He said he didn't know what happened to her. On Monday, a friend of the siblings who worked at the beer hall let the siblings review the security footage. They saw Lisa Marie leave the beer hall with Rogers and get into his SUV. Then they drove off. Danielle and Raphael asked Rogers again about the early morning hours of Sunday. He repeated the story about the after party. Then they confronted him regarding the video. Suddenly, he had a new story. He said that he had dropped her off at a gas station near her house, but he maintained that he didn't know where she was. The siblings thought that the fact he had changed his story was suspicious, so they went to the police. On Tuesday, December 20th, Rogers was brought into the police station for questioning. After several hours of interrogation, he explained what happened. He said that he and Lisa Marie had been having an affair for about 6 months. That night, they went to the beer hall. Afterward, they went to a fast food restaurant at the end of the night. They got some food, and they talked for about 30 minutes in the SUV. Then Lisa Marie broke the news to him that she was ending the affair. She said she was going to recommit herself to her husband and tried to have a child with him. Rogers said he became angry and picked up a hammer he had in his vehicle. He hit Lisa Marie in the head 8 times. He then drove her to his house. He dug a hole in his backyard and put Lisa Marie in the hole. He noticed she was still breathing and he didn't want to bury her alive, so he struck her 2 more times in the head with a hammer to make sure she was dead. He then covered her body with soil and manure. The police searched the backyard and found the body. Jackie Rogers was charged with first-degree murder. Rogers went to trial in September 2018. His lawyer argued that the murder was not premeditated. Rogers had snapped in the heat of the moment and killed Lisa Marie, so he should be found guilty of manslaughter and not first-degree murder. The trial lasted a little more than a week. The jury deliberated for 3 days. Jackie Rogers was found guilty of first-degree murder. In April 2019, he was sentenced to 26 years in prison. At the time of this video, 40-year-old Jackie Rogers is serving his sentence at the Wasco State Prison in Wasco, California. He'll be eligible for parole in August 2033.